A week later, Emeka sat alone in his car, holding an envelope in his trembling hands. He had picked up the DNA results earlier that day, but had been too terrified to open them. His breath came in short, shallow bursts as he ripped open the envelope. Inside, the report was cold and clinical, filled with percentage and terms he barely understood. But one line stood out like a flashing beacon. Probability of paternity, 0%. Emeka's world crumbled. He sat frozen in his seat, staring at the words, unable to comprehend them. His mind raced. How? How could this be? He quickly scanned through the rest of the results, one by one. Each of the daughters showed the same result. None of them were his. Only Chisom, their son, was confirmed as biologically his. Emeka's hands shook as the full weight of the revelation crashed over him. He felt his heart pounding in his chest, his vision blurring with tears. How could Nnenna do this to him? After everything that had built together, after the love and trust that had shared for so many years, he was devastated, furious, betrayed. Without thinking, Emeka stormed into the house, the DNA results clutched tightly in his fists. Nnenna was in the living room reading when he burst through the door. His face was flushed with anger, his breathing heavy. "Nnenna!" he shouted, his voice trembling with emotion. Startled, she looked up at him, confused by the sudden burst. "What is it, Emeka?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. He threw the papers at her. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice filled with accusation. Nnenna picked up the papers, her brow furrowing in confusion as she skimmed through the results. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "It's a DNA test," Emeka snapped. "None of the girls are mine, Nnenna. None of them. How could you do this to me?" Nnenna felt like the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. Her hands shook as she read the results, her mind reeling. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "That is impossible." Emeka's face twisted with rage. "Impossible? Are you telling me that this test is wrong? That I don't have the right to know whether my children are actually mine?" Nnenna stood up, her legs trembling beneath her. "Emeka, I swear, I have never been unfaithful to you. I don't know how this happened, and there's no way these girls aren't yours. I carried them, I gave birth to them. I would never." Emeka glared at her, his voice ice cold. "You expect me to believe that?" Tears streamed down Nnenna's face as she struggled to make sense of it. She couldn't understand how the test could say such a thing. They were her children. She had felt each one grow inside her, had endured the pain of labor, had loved them more than anything in the world. There was no question in her mind that they were hers. "I need another test," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to know if these girls are really mine." Emeka's anger momentarily gave way to confusion. "What do you mean?" "Of course, they are yours." Nnenna shook her head, her hands clutching the papers tightly. "If they are not yours, I need to know if they are mine." The next few days were a blur. Nnenna insisted on a separate DNA test to confirm her own relationship with the children. Emeka, still reeling from the initial shock, reluctantly agreed. The tension between them was palpable. Conversations were brief, filled with cold silence and mistrust. The second set of results arrived a week later. Nnenna stood alone in the clinic's sterile waiting room, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, praying for some kind of resolution, some way to make sense of the nightmare she found herself in. As she read the results, none of the 6 daughters were biological hers. The paper slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. Her mind struggled to comprehend the words staring back at her. How could it be possible? She had carried those children, felt them kick inside her, gave birth to them through the pain and joy of motherhood. How could they not be hers? Tears welled in her eyes and she collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking with sobs. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Not only were the girls not Emeka's, but they weren't hers either. It was as though their entire family had been built on lie. When she returned home, Emeka see the devastation in her eyes. She didn't need to say anything. He knew the results were worse than either of them had imagined. Nnenna handed him the papers, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are not mine either." Emeka took the papers from her, scanning them in disbelief. His face paled as he realized the gravity of what they had just discovered. How is that possible?" he stammered, his voice breaking. Nnenna shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I don't understand." For the first time since the whole ordeal began, Emeka's anger softened. He could see the pain in Nnenna's eyes, the confusion and heartbreak that mirrored his own. He hadn't betrayed him. She was just as lost and broken as he was. "We need answers," Emeka said quietly, the voice filled with determination. They began retracing their steps, trying to piece together what had happened. The only connection that seemed to make sense was the maternity home where all 6 of their daughters had been born. Together, they went back to the maternity home, determined to uncover the truth. After asking questions and pressing for information, they discovered a horrifying secret. The midwife who had delivered their children had been running an underground baby selling scheme for years. She had been swapping newborns with other babies for a price, selling boys to wealthy clients and keeping girls for unsuspecting parents. Their daughters, each one of them, had been victims of this scheme. The babies they had raised, loved and nurtured had been taken from other mothers, sold to them like commodities. The midwife had been arrested months earlier after someone blew the whistle on her operation. When Emeka and Nnenna finally tracked her down, they found her in a hospital, dying of a terminal illness. Her once powerful, calculating demeanor was gone, replaced by a frail, broken woman whose time was running out. She was weak, but her voice held no remorse when she spoke. "You want answers?" she rasped. "I did what I did to survive. Those babies were just business." Nnenna and Emeka stood by her hospital bed, their hearts heavy with rage and sorrow. They wanted justice, but what they really wanted was their children, the ones who had been stolen from them, but they knew they would never get them back. The midwife looked at them, her eyes hollow and tired. "I'm dying," she said. "It's over for me. The girls, they'll be fine. They are better off with you." With that, she closed her eyes, her breathing shallow and labored. There was no satisfaction in her demise, just a hollow emptiness. For weeks, Emeka and Nnenna struggled to come to terms with the truth. The daughters they had raised were not biological theirs, but they were their children in every other way that mattered. They had loved them, cared for them, watched them grow into bright, capable young girls. Biology didn't define their bond. Slowly, they began to heal. Emeka apologized to Nnenna for doubting her, for accusing her of infidelity and breaking the trust they had built over the years. Nnenna, though still shaking, forgave him. They had been through unimaginable pain, but they were both victims of cruel scheme far beyond their control. The love they shared had been tested, but it remained stronger than the lies that had nearly torn them apart. Their daughters, blissfully unaware of the storm that had engulfed their parents, continued to live their lives as normal. Emeka and Nnenna made the difficult decision not to tell the girls the truth, at least not until they were older. They were still too young to understand the complexities of what had happened. What mattered most was that they were loved and they had a family that would always be there for them. Over the years, they watched their daughters grow into incredible women. Doctors, lawyers, business women. Even their son, Chisom, is now a graduate from the university. They excelled in everything they did and they loved their parents fiercely. 10 years later, as the couple sat on their porch watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard, Emeka turned to Nnenna and smiled. "We've been through so much," he said, "but I wouldn't change a thing." Nnenna squeezed his hands. "Me neither." And with that, they lived the rest of their lives in peace, knowing that a child doesn't need to come from your loins to be your own. The couple, Nnenna and Emeka, has also decided to carry their little secrets or big secrets to their graves. Is this a wise decision?